Now, the US presidential election taking place next week is being closely watched by every country on the planet, as the American president has long been considered the leader of the Western world. Russia was believed to have meddled in the previous 2016 US presidential race, using an estimated 50,000 automated accounts on Twitter to spread partisan content and disinformation targeting American voters, as well as running a campaign to denigrate then candidate Hillary Clinton. Security officials have been warning that foreign powers have been trying to influence the upcoming election as well. Washington's National Counterintelligence and Security Center has singled out Russia, Iran and China as attempting to use online disinformation and other means to try and influence voters, stir up disorder and generally undermine confidence in the democratic process. We discuss what some of these revisionist states are hoping to see from the upcoming US election and how a Trump or Biden presidency would address these powers. Joining me is Joshua Tucker, co-director of the Center for Social Media and Politics at New York University. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here.
We also connect with Dr. Kim Myung-ju, professor at Konkuk University of Foreign Studies here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us. It's always so wonderful to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's start with you, Dr. Tucker. Now, US intelligence officials, they've warned that foreign powers will use covert and overt influence measures to try and sway US voters. So what do these measures entail? And have you noticed any changes in strategy from the last election?
Well, I think there's 2 points that you need to have to structure this discussion. The first thing is that it's actually kind of hard for those of us on the outside to know what's happening in terms of right now what's going on. We have a pretty good understanding of what happened in 2016. We know something about 2018. But given what's going on in 2020, most of this information is being collected by the platforms themselves. And so in order to have a more robust conversation about what we need more of a situation where it's possible for outsiders like myself who study this information to see what's happening in real time. And that's much more difficult. That being said, we can talk about a couple of different changes that we know what's happening. So when we went back and looked at the data from 2016 that was released by Twitter in terms of the types of foreign influence campaigns that were going on Twitter, it was overwhelmingly from Russia. Other countries were sort of small bit players at this point. There was a little bit from Venezuela towards the end of it. Now, this is Twitter, not Facebook, but this is what we knew on Twitter. But by 2018, in our off elections, in our midterm elections, when the president wasn't on the ballot, we actually saw much less activity by the Russians. And we saw other actors, including Iran and Saudi Arabia, involved in influence campaigns at that point in time. So one thing I think we know for sure in 2020 is that this is not only Russia's field at this point. And we've already seen this, right? The one sort of big incident that we had recently, which was with fake emails being sent out to intimidate voters, but it's not quite sure whether the goal of that was to intimidate voters or the goal of that was to make one side look bad because they were being portrayed as intimidating voters. And that was allegedly sourced to Iran. So I think the first thing we know is that it's going to be more players, more playbooks. But the other big thing that we know is that with 2016, 4 years in the rearview mirror, other actors who are interested in this can sort of copy some of the tactics of the Russians, or at least this idea of using social media accounts to try to influence what's going on. And when we think about the actors who have the largest, stake in what happens in the United States election, that's going to be American actors as well. So I think we're in a situation where we have to think about domestic disinformation campaigns, we have to think about foreign disinformation campaigns, and we have to think about it from multiple actors.
So yes, last week, as you said, US intelligence, the FBI said that Iran had been sending threatening text messages to Democratic voters. And, well, do you think we're going to see more of these attempts? And the US State Department, they also found that China has been using text messages and social media to continue spreading disinformation about COVID-19. And, well, do you think we're going to see more of these attempts as we get closer and closer to the election day?
So 2 things to put that in context. First off, yes, of course, we're going to see continued more attempts like this. There's a toolbox out there. It's a toolbox that political actors can try to use to achieve political goals, and they're going to use it, and they're going to try to use it. But again, we have to think about sort of a couple different things here. The first is, what is going to be the goals of the various political actors who are here, right? Some political actors may be getting involved. As you said, in 2016, it was concluded by the Senate Intelligence Report on this that one of the goals of the Russians was to hurt the chances of then candidate Hillary Clinton when she was running for president in 2016. There are other reasons, though, that you might want to get involved, right? Like the other big thing that people are worried about, like in that Senate Intelligence Committee report, was about exacerbating polarization in the United States generally and sort of pitting Americans against each other more and sort of stirring up partisan tension. But of course, it may also be the case that what you're trying to do is kind of cast doubt on the integrity of American democracy, right? If you are an authoritarian regime and you want to say to your population, look, we don't have free and fair elections, but you know what? Nobody really has free and fair elections. Look, even these US elections, they're not free, they're not fair because of all these things that are wrong with it. Then casting doubt on the integrity of the electoral process, casting doubt on the democratic process can be valuable. As you said, China may be mounting information campaigns around COVID. That may be a whole other set of concerns and reasons why you would be doing that. Nevertheless, I think the important thing is we can talk a lot about these foreign influence campaigns. We can even talk about domestic influence campaigns. But it's crucially important that we put this in the context of the overall information environment. These foreign influence campaigns are salacious, but I can't even tell you how many emails I received since we started this conversation, but certainly in the last day from people about the election. Now, someone threatening me or something like that obviously would stand out. But when we think about, and we've been looking at this in our lab, when you look at the context of the tweets that were received by or viewed by Americans from these foreign influence campaigns, there are orders of magnitude higher the number of tweets people are seeing from politicians, right? American politicians. And then it's even much, much orders of magnitude higher that people are seeing from media sources, right? And online, reporters that you follow. And so if you put, and of course, everybody is retweeting media sources all the time. So if you begin to think about the proportion, right, that's being seen from these influence campaigns, I think that's the other thing important to put it into context. Yes, there are all sorts of reasons nations might be wanting to do this, but that's a separate question from whether it's going to have any noticeable impact on the outcome. And indeed, the biggest impact may be from the discussions that surround it. And in the US, we have a very odd situation here where we have one candidate who he himself is trying to cast doubts about the integrity of the electoral process. And so these discussions about all these things that can undermine the integrity of democracy in the United States may actually be playing into and sort of working with that.
Right, so whether these foreign powers are trying to take us candidates or endorse one, we don't really know. But what we do know is that they are trying to disrupt this process or stir up some trouble in the countries that they're targeting. And well, Dr. Kim, now Trump has many say that Beijing would prefer to have Joe Biden in office, as of course his so-called friend, President Donald Trump, he's gone from calling President Xi Jinping his friend to blaming China for the coronavirus and continuing to pile pressure on the country's biggest tech companies. So would you agree that maybe Beijing would be trying to work their influence and try to get Biden in office? And even if Joe Biden does assume presidency, would it be that easy to reduce tensions or revert to friendlier relations between Washington and Beijing?
Well, on your first question, I've been hearing from different sources that actually a considerable number of strategists in Beijing would actually prefer having Donald Trump continuing on in his second term in the office. Because in their thinking, at least those people who prefer having Trump in the office, they think Donald Trump actually helps China in having United States continue to undermine its own position in the global stance, losing its position as a country of leadership and leading its pack of allies and so on. Trump is actually hurting United States stance big time. So if they believe having Trump itself actually serves the national interest of China. So on your first question, I don't think it's necessary to conclude or be certain that China as a whole prefers Biden. Having Biden in the office, on your second question, will that help improve relationship between Beijing and China? I think there has been a definite learning effect on the side of Democrats and then Biden's camp about how the hardline approach towards Beijing actually helps politically, domestic politics angle there. And they thought that Trump's approach to China has had some positive impact in terms of serving domestic political interests for the party, as well as also, China's overall stance towards the United States, even before the Trump years, has been hardening. So in a way, some people, in addition to domestic political calculation, also internationally, when you think about so-called national interest for the United States, I guess the number of the people who have been thinking that having hardline on China actually serves U.S. national interest, regardless of domestic political divide, I think the number has been increasing. So having Biden does not guarantee that actually Washington is going to dramatically soften its position towards Beijing.
Right, and actually, well, more and more countries around the world, they've become wary of China in the past year. So even if with a Biden presidency or with Trump maybe softening his stance on China, do you think there will be a radical change to this general wariness that surrounds China?
You mean, I guess, the overall world stance towards China and then the way United States perceives China. Well, I'm not exactly certain at this point. I guess that's because I believe like 80% or close to 90% of, or maybe 80% in my own rough subjective judgment. The reason why we're having this hardline stance towards China, China has earned it, about 80% of it in my own personal subjective judgment, because China has been introducing all these doctrines and then policies, such as like producing all the important things for the future inside China without relying on, the international trade and so on. So China has earned it big time, many ways. And of course, Trump has kind of further escalated all these kind of sentiments for sure. But so because of that, because it has been China's own action to escalate its hardline stance towards the outside world and being tough towards neighbors such as South Korea and so on, I don't know whether the changes in U.S. politics will actually bring upon the change of attitude inside China. It may cause some softening of Beijing's stance based on the learning effect from the past several years. As people like me who are saying these kind of things increase, they will realize, their approach to the international affairs has not been totally productive. So there may be some kind of learning effect, but fundamentally speaking, with the same kind of leadership being in the office, I would not expect some kind of dramatic or significant change in terms of China's stance towards the international community.
Well, in addition to Xi Jinping, Dr. Kim, Trump has befriended a couple of world leaders who aren't exactly popular around the world and who many would describe as rather radical strongmen like Vladimir Putin and Shinzo Abe. And of course, he's stepped down. But while Trump has, however, he's distanced himself from Putin and Xi over the course of his re-election campaign, saying that no president has been tougher on Russia or China. So if he is re-elected, then what do you think his foreign priorities will be? Do you think he's going to strengthen America's alliance with traditional friends or continue with his, for the lack of a better word, frenemies?
That's a great question. That's a really tough question to answer. I'm saying it because of this line of thinking that I've been having so far. That is, Trump's foreign policy so far has been very much based on domestic political calculations. I mean, I don't remember any other U.S. president who has set up the re-election campaign team immediately after his first election. Donald Trump is the one who set up his, re-election campaign system immediately after he entered the office. That was unbelievable. That was a very impressive move on his side. That means everything he has been doing had to do with his calculations for re-election, whether he serves his re-election or not, whether his base, so-called, will vote for him because of his policies. In my own view, during his first term, most of his foreign policy had a lot to do with this. Now, if he ever gets re-elected, what is he going to do? He doesn't need any re-election. So how will that actually change his foreign policy? That has been a big puzzle in my mind and a very important question in my mind, because I thought domestic political calculation has been so big in his setting directions of his foreign policy. For example, like being able to say, look, I asked all these allies to pay much more, for their own defense. That's all my achievement. all this kind of stuff that has made the key allies so upset and unsettling. Is he going to? Will he need to say this again during his second term? What would be the motivation? Well, because he doesn't have a re-election, I would have a hard time answering those kind of questions. So I'm not exactly sure. He may be thinking about his legacy after the end of his second term, and perhaps his base will be the one who will be remembering him. So maybe he will continue on with the similar policies. But then again, he may not. I will have to. I'll need time to think through that very tough question, very important question. However, though.
Well, Dr. Tucker, now, how has U.S. intelligence been preparing for and also tackling attempts at foreign influence or intervention through social media? And do you think they've been effective at all?
I mean, I think the big fundamental difference this time around is that a lot of people were caught by surprise in this in 2016. And we've had 4 years to think about, what's going to happen next and to set up partnerships with intelligence across the platforms, with the platforms with each other. We have academic institutions that are trying to do monitoring. The Stanford Internet Observatory is, a huge operation that's been set up with 100 people trying to monitor these things in real time. So we're never going to have the same thing as 2016, where this kind of came out of nowhere. Nobody knew it was happening, and then we were all sort of shocked about it afterwards. Now, that being said, everything in technology, everything we know about the internet is that it's a cat and mouse game. Right? Because what's happening now is technology is sort of changing so quickly that you have one side adopt and then you have the other side adopt to it. So yes, we've missed the moment, right, that we had in 2016 when the Russians were first doing this and no one was really paying attention to it. Now we're in a completely different moment. Does that mean that they won't come up with something that they can do? Look, we saw these email attempts. We're seeing other things. We're seeing the platforms kicking people off the platforms for these coordinated influence campaigns. So obviously actors are trying it, right? When you get a new tool in your political toolkit, people want to use it unless they're deterred from using it, which gets back to your question about whether Trump has really been tough on the Russians or Trump has sent a signal that he never wants to hear about Russian interference in the 2016 election because it tarnishes him and it makes it look like his victory was somehow less than legitimate. And so in those cases, you're always going to have this kind of cat and mouse thing going back and forth where one side is trying to build upon what it's learned previously and move forward, but now they have to deal with reaction to it. I mean, if we think back to the early days of when Twitter first burst onto the scenes, it was really seen as a tool. Social media was a tool that was going to be pro-democracy, that was going to help strengthen democratization around the world, right? We talked about it's being used in Gezi Park in Turkey or Euromaidan in Ukraine or during the Arab Spring. Now, 6 years later, what we hear is social media going to destroy democracy? Can democracy survive social media? So all of these things go back and forth. And part of the reason that they go back and forth is the tech is actually changing so quickly, right? So the way that the superpowers dealt with each other during the Cold War, the changes that came about there in technology, they've been much compressed into a shorter period of space right here now. So it happens in a way that you have new things that come about. You have new things that come about in a much quicker time period.
Right, and we're seeing these foreign powers sort of leap on those, get on those technologies and act very quickly. And, well, Dr. Kim, before we go now, we are seeing all these foreign powers opposed to Western democracies, I suppose, trying to increase their influence. And while Trump has said that if he stays in office, he's going to have very quick deals with the Iranians and the North Koreans. And of course, he's been emphasizing his recent foreign policy victories in the Middle East. But of course, they've also stirred some controversy. Now, who do you think is better for world peace, President Trump or his rival, Joe Biden?
That's another very big question, difficult to answer. But those of us who study international relations usually have two theoretical background in answering those questions. The world will be in peace either when you have a very strong, militarily strong, benevolent power in place, taking control over things around the world, then world will be expected to be in peace. Second will be if, without that kind of power, if the countries are working together in a tight cooperation system, the world will be in peace. In that regard, what Trump has been doing, undermining its alliance system on the second point, and then also talking about reducing its presence around the world, perhaps possibly including in Korea and so on. Those two things, we have to say in international relations theoretical terms, Trump has been disservicing for the world peace. So if Biden takes step the opposite way, we should say that Biden is the one who will help world live in a more peaceful, reality. At least that's what I can say based on the theories that we've been studying and teaching in international relations.
Well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the discussion today, I'm afraid. But thank you so much for your insights. That was Dr. Joshua A. Tucker, co-director of the Center for Social Media and Politics at New York University, and Dr. Kim Byung-ju, professor at Konkuk University of Foreign Studies in Seoul. Thank you both so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Thanks. It was great talking with both of you.
And to our viewers, thank you for watching. Hope to have you join us again at the same time tomorrow. Till then, have a great day or evening wherever you are. Goodbye.